Have you ever wondered about the history of Roman gladiators? The Colosseum is crumbling, and the echoes of roaring crowds have faded into the pages of history, but the legend of Roman gladiators continues to captivate our imaginations. What was life like for these fierce warriors? How did they rise to prominence? And why were the Romans so obsessed with watching grown men bash each other's skulls in? Let's don our tunics, step back in time, and dive into the brutal, exhilarating, and occasionally hilarious world of Roman gladiators. I'm Keith, and this is History Wonder. The gladiatorial games of ancient Rome were essentially the first iteration of pay-per-view mixed martial arts, just with way more armor and considerably looser rule set. But contrary to popular belief, the origins of gladiators didn't begin with Rome. The idea of forcing captives to fight came from the Etruscans, Rome's fashionable and bloodthirsty neighbors. The Etruscan culture, funeral rites included munera, blood sacrifices where prisoners fought to appease the spirits of the deceased. Romans, never ones to miss out on an opportunity to show off, adopted and scaled up these practices. Initially, these games were small and private, like an exclusive VIP fight club at a nobleman's wake. But as Rome expanded and became rich beyond measure, the games evolved into massive public spectacles meant to entertain the teeming masses. Think of the gladiatorial games as a combination of a state fair and the Super Bowl, just with more tigers and significantly fewer nachos. By the time of Julius Caesar, 100 BC to 44 BC, the games had hit their stride. Caesar hosted munera with hundreds of matches, eager to show the voters, who of course were still alive unlike those pesky Etruscan spirits, that he was a man of the people. This formula, lavish spending, blood sports, and political popularity, proved incredibly effective. Emperors knew that if you keep the crowds entertained, they'll overlook the occasional act of tyranny. In fact, gladiators became so popular that some were the ancient equivalents of sports stars today. We even have graffiti from Pompeii with messages like, "Gladius, the Thracian makes the girls sigh," which translated into modern terms sounds like, "The Thracian Chad is an absolute heartbreaker." Forget the popular image of the gladiator as a ripped, professional fighter living the dream. While some were highly trained celebrities, the reality was far more diverse and quite darker, frankly. Many were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals. The Romans thought, well, if we're gonna kill these guys anyway, why not do it in a way that lets them entertain us? Classy, right? That being said, not all gladiators were slaves. Some volunteers called octorati willingly signed up. Picture a Roman dude slamming down his calyx, which is a wine cup, yelling, "Enough of this boring farm life! I want a sword, fame, and a chance to wrestle tigers!" He might have been fleeing dead or was just looking for a thrill, but for these brave volunteers, the ring was a path to wealth and admiration. Kind of like modern-day influencers, but with fewer selfies and more stabbing. If you were one of these poor souls or thrill-seeking maniacs, you'd find yourself shipped off to a Laetus or gladiator school. Here, prospective gladiators were rigorously trained, dieted, and prepared by a lanista, a professional trainer. The training regimen was all about conditioning for controlled violence, with recruits honing their skills in wooden weapons before moving on to the real sharp stuff. You could almost say these schools were an ancient version of boot camps or reality TV competitions like The Ultimate Fighter. Trainees were ranked, had rivalries, and were tested on their skills. If somebody dropped the ball, or their sword, there was no rose ceremony, just the possibility of having their face permanently restructured. The most famous gladiatorial venue, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Coliseum, was like the Roman version of Madison Square Garden, only if Madison Square Garden had occasional naval battles staged in its ring. It could hold over 50,000 screaming fans, and it had a retractable awning called a velarium to keep spectators shaded. A little touch of luxury in between all the death matches. The Colosseum was the brainchild of Emperor Vespasian, completed in 80 AD by his son Titus. The games in the Colosseum were designed for maximum carnage, and the organizers had a flair for drama. There were battle reenactments, animal hunts, and sometimes, if the engineers were feeling particularly creative, they'd flood the arena and stage mock naval battles. Imagine watching boats crash into each other in the arena, surrounded by Roman fans eating their version of popcorn, which was honey glazed nuts and roasted chickpeas. Talk about a spectacle. The fights themselves were a combination of tactical skill, theatrical flair, and insane courage. There were specific classes of gladiators, each with its own unique weapons and fighting style. Some of the most popular classes included the Murmillo, heavily armored with a big shield and a short sword. Think of him as the tank. The Thracian wielded a curved short sword, a Sika, and carried a small shield. The Thracians were agile and deadly, playing the roles of the speedsters. Rotarius. This guy fought with a net and a trident, relying on speed and maneuverability. Picture a fisherman who decided to join WWE, and you're close. The Secutor, the mortal enemy of the Rotarius, with a helmet designed to thwart that annoying net. The Secutor was built for close combat, forcing the Rotarius to stay on his toes and away from his pointy sword. While the fights were undoubtedly violent, they weren't always to the death. Contrary to popular belief, gladiators were expensive to train and not always expendable. Most bouts ended with one fighter yielding. However, if the defeated gladiator couldn't convince the audience of his fighting prowess, the crowd or the emperor could give a thumbs up or thumbs down, deciding his fate. Historians now believe the thumbs down wasn't actually a Roman signal for off with his head, but likely a call to spare the fighter. Still, knowing that your life hung in the balance of audience approval must have been nerve-wracking. Imagine performing for a crowd at a comedy club, but if you bomb, they can legally throw a spear at you. Gladiators didn't just fight each other, they also faced exotic animals like lions, bears, tigers, and even elephants. This spectacle was not just about watching a man get mauled, it was a display of Rome's imperial power. Look at us, they said, we've conquered entire continents, and now we make their scariest animals wrestle for fun. It's like if a modern empire decided to pit John Cena against an actual grizzly bear just to prove a point. The animals didn't fare much better than the gladiators, often becoming reluctant participants in the bloody spectacle. Although animal rights weren't exactly a thing back then, it's safe to assume PETA would have had a field day. That's right, you thought gladiator fights were a boys-only club? Not so fast. The Romans had women gladiators too, known as gladiatrices. Although not as common, female gladiators were a rare but exciting novelty in the arena. Roman historian Cassius Dio describes how Emperor Domitian once staged a fight between women and even dwarfs. Sounds like an early draft of Game of Thrones episode. Or maybe it's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Anyway, these women were often slaves or volunteers who wanted a taste of the thrill. While little is known about their specific training or class, they undoubtedly faced the same brutal lifestyle as their male counterparts. And let's be real, they probably got paid less too. Some injustices are timeless. For centuries, the gladiatorial games were the lifeblood of Roman entertainment, but even Rome's greatest parties had to end sometime. By the late 4th century, changing attitudes, financial strains, and the rise of Christianity began to erode the popularity of the games. Gladiator schools were closed, and the last known fight was held in 404 AD. That year, a monk named Telemachus dramatically rushed into the arena to stop a fight. Spoiler alert, he was stoned to death by an angry crowd. But Emperor Honorius was so shaken that he banned gladiatorial combat soon after. And thus, after nearly 700 years of roaring crowds, clashing steel, and spilled blood, the age of the gladiator had come to an end. But their stories live on, and for good reason. In many ways, the gladiators were the ultimate expression of Rome's glory, savagery, and larger-than-life spirit. Today, they remain a symbol of an era when death itself was made into an art form. Thanks to movies like Gladiator, Russell Crowe yelling, "Are you not entertained?" It will never get old. And TV shows like Spartacus, the gladiators of ancient Rome are more alive in our imaginations than ever. They were athletes, entertainers, warriors, and slaves. A complex legacy of bravery and brutality, of heroism and honor. They captivated the Roman public, and now they captivate us. So next time you find yourself feeling a little bored at a football game, remember, at least no one is unleashing a tiger on the quarterback. Thanks for watching. What topics in history have you wondered about? Comment below and let us know what videos you would like to see. And be sure to like and subscribe.